Welcome back to Mild Sauce Live. I'm Jake Krez, and we have a special guest again tonight. We are here with the one and only Kevin Coval.
What's up, y'all?
Writer, poet, leader of other writers and poets.
Just a fellow
novelist.
comrade.
How many dashes do you have?
Hopefully like a fellow homie of the
fellow
masses.
Homie as well.
Yeah.
Good friend.
Yeah.
Good family member.
There you go. That's right.
Welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me, man. Yeah.
Shout out Soundscape
Congrats.
Studios.
Yes,
for
always.
having us as well. Mike Kolar always
Salutes to Mike Kolar.
Boathouse helping set up too.
Yeah, man. Good dude.
But,
talented musician.
Talented musician. He also sets up a mean mic.
Yeah, he really does. I feel very comfortable.
But yeah, man, thanks for stopping by on Thursday night?
Yeah, thank you.
Get into it real quick. You've been very busy as always, popping up in Bonobos ads, writing books.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about this latest book that you've got out in the streets right now. I was at the opening. It was at Chop Shop. Correct?
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, man. Thanks for coming.
Of course.
Yeah. It's called Everything Must Go: The Life and Death of an American Neighborhood. It looks like this.
There it is.
And it was
quick zoom in on it here.
It was illustrated by a very talented young artist named Langston Alston. So he did the cover work, but also it's based off of graphic novels and comic books. And so, Langston did stuff like this in the book and really tricked it out. And essentially what the book is about is Wicker Park in the 90s, basically like 94, charts maybe 94 to 2001, which is when I lived in and around the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of documenting the transition of that neighborhood and what I saw go from a working class Latinx and Polish and Ukrainian neighborhood to a kind of neo-bohemia for working class artists to something then that no one I knew could afford anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a process that's not unique to Wicker Park at all. It's not unique to Chicago, something that is kind of complicating cities across the planet.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to, just kind of remember who was there and why the neighborhood meant so much to me and maybe raise some questions about what kind of neighborhoods and cities are we trying to build. And
I mean, that's a super interesting question to ask right now too. I mean, I live in Pilsen right now, and you said you moved to Uptown. Both areas that are seeing, like we were just talking, Uptown now isn't Uptown in the 90s.
Yeah.
But Pilsen now isn't Pilsen in the 90s either. And I know there's a lot of stress down there about, rising rents, and you can see it spilling west down 18th Street.
Yeah.
Do you find that what you experienced at Wicker Park in the 90s and into today kind of is a microcosm or maybe larger of what is to come or what is currently happening in a lot of these places?
I do. And I remember in the 90s, there were mayoral conferences where they would hold up Wicker Park as an example of how to gentrify a neighborhood.
And they were using that like positively at the time?
But it was
now it's kind of like
but it was used by real estate developers and politicians,
right.
People who kind of were doing that work of urban planning, but planning a neighborhood for the few as opposed to the many.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were using it as an example of basically how to flip a neighborhood from working class to a neighborhood that is able to attract tech companies and boutiques and then ultimately larger corporate dollars and developers and things like that. So they used it as a good example, but it depends what side you're sitting on. If you can no longer afford rent there, if you are, in the neighborhood renting for 20 years, 10 years, and then your rent, which happened to me, it goes up 20, 25%, 30% a year, then it becomes, unaffordable to live there.
Absolutely.
And my experience and the experiences of some of the people that I knew there, it was indicative of that neighborhood, but it's certainly not again unique to us and unique to the neighborhood. So it is intended to be itself. I mean, it's a realist portrait in my memory of what was happening, but it is meant to be kind of a metaphor for what is happening now, very much.
Yeah, and I mean, it is so interesting to talk about, like, the topic is loaded. I mean, you walk around the city, and you talk about building the city for few rather than the many, and when you walk around the city, it does seem that way. You see corporations buying up downtown to the point where there's not even, like, any commercial life downtown anymore.
Yeah.
That's creeping out of downtown even more. Wicker Park, I mean, there's closed, the 7-Eleven closed.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how 7-Eleven on the corner right there closes it, you know what I mean?
Right. How does Wicker Park not have a corner store anymore?
That's crazy, right? every bar is like a Soho House type bar.
Right.
Where do you see this all going? I mean, I have this conversation with a lot of my friends and stuff around the city, and I mean, it seems like I feel as though a bubble has to pop. People keep talking about 2020, and I wonder what the city's going to look like if it does, because there's a lot of projects that weren't finished back in 2008. The whole West Side, pretty much that Roosevelt corridor.
Yeah.
Where do you see this kind of? Do you see like projected future for what's going to happen? Or
Well, you're right. I think that all of us have a really important part to play. I think that, we vote in a lot of ways every day with how we spend our time, where we spend our money, who we put in office. And I think, the people, the future of the city will look like. And, I was walking down the street here. I got off the bus at Damon and walked Chicago Ave and, dipped in like a few of the local stores. And one of the things that one of the women was saying, who is a merchant at the store, she's said that it isn't as populated of a street anymore. Chicago Avenue is what it was even 5 years ago. And I think that, she said, I fear the future of all Amazon boxes, essentially, or she said something like that. And I think, like, well, it's a good question. What kind of future city do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a small neighborhood where we know one another, where we know local business owners, where we spend our dollars locally? Or do we want a monotony of monoculture? And to me, I kind of am fearful of that monotony, because not only have I seen probably too many, dystopic science, fiction,
absolutely.
fantasy shows or novels, but I also think that monoculture leads to a kind of fascism, at least of ideas, maybe, and I want us to be resistant of those ideas, because I think the metaphor I've been thinking about and using when I've been talking about the book is not that I'm a farmer or know anything about farming, but monocrops are bad for the soil. They will dead the soil after, if you just corn, soybeans, agribusiness is ultimately bad for the earth. But when you have multiple crops growing on a patch of land, that soil becomes very rich in nutrients. And I think that is a metaphor for how culture works too. If it's only one of the same, if you only have doctor's office, architectural firms, and real estate offices along Chicago Avenue or any street, then what kind of public culture are we building, and who is also able to be in that neighborhood? And I don't know. The thing that I loved about Wicker in the Day, and part of the reason why I wrote the book, as much as it's a lament, it's also a celebration, because I was looked after by folks on the street that had a vibrant street culture. I would step out on Milwaukee Avenue and people would yell my name, and I would feel like I was, people like, damn, I don't really know anyone in this neighborhood, but like homie on the street is looking out for me. Like, he said my name today.
Right.
That was the only person that said my name today. And then I started to learn, the names of other people, and it felt like a community. I
mean, that's what it was, right?
Right.
Inherently.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting when you bring this up, because I was actually having this thought the other day, just thinking about like the rise of social media on top of that. You know what I mean? Like, there's kind of a lack of growing up in a bubble anymore. Like, nobody just like grows up. Like, when I was a kid, even in the 90s, it was like you grew up and like ran out in your backyard and like scraped your knee and like figured stuff out when like other kids in the neighborhood figured it out. Someone got a CD, like that's how you figured out about that artist or something like that. I feel like that's like gone completely by the wayside. And when you talk about monoculture, like you're good at putting terms to things, I think. That's
Thanks.
a great way to describe that, because I think that's happening on many levels right now. And we are getting to this point where like everyone listens to the same song, everyone sees the same thing, everyone's exposed to the same like idea or joke, and there's not like kind of a pocket anymore.
Fam, I'm on the bus here along Chicago Avenue. Man, all of us, we're just stuck. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
we're just like head down. We're, you know what I mean? We're just like in our AirPods or whatever, and we're locked. We're locked in. It's like the bubble is actually like the bubble of self. And it's just it's just like everything is being fed very rapidly towards that self, but it's a self then that might reflect, that idea of monoculture. And
Right.
if you absorb that, then maybe you remain in that bubble. And you're right, like, we do need a culture of people who are actively resisting and thinking outside of that bubble and box.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, it's almost cannibalistic in a way too, right? Like you have so many brands and so many people and so many artists talking about culture, 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 and like you're almost like excavating a corpse that's been like dug out. You know what I mean? Because you have to create culture for it to be mined, but if you're not creating any, then there's kind of
well, that's the thing, man. I think so. You know, both of us are. You know, we are actively a part of Regal Live, people to people cultures,
right.
And you can't fabricate that. You know what I mean?
No,
like
not
like
at all, right.
and I think therein lies the solution in some ways.
Sure.
And like it's I think it's when people build with one another, when people sit down, have conversations like this, platforms like this, but also then when people gather in public space to experience something together. You know, whether that's a show that, you know, you might be able to see on IG, let's say,
Sure.
but you don't experience it in the same way. And I think what I believe in is the retention of, you know, very local community building and the import of that local community. You know, because I think therein lies some of the, you know, differentiation between what is happening. You know, it's why, you know, something like footwork is such a special thing in the landscape culturally, because it's you know, something that, sure, like you could trace and do a lineage and, you know, kind of physical etymology of that dance to, you know, the planet, but it's something that resides in a very particular way. Absolutely. With a particular history in Chicago. And to me, I love things like that, and I'm always attracted to that kind of specificity. I think because I'm a poet, so I love that kind of, you know, minutia. But to me, it's like that's how we resist monoculture, is like being very cognizant of what's around us and inventive then in that way.
No, I mean, I think obviously you're out doing that every day and like helping breed a whole next generation of people who do that as well. But you mentioned like going to shows and going to places, and it kind of bring it back to the book and back to Wicker Park a little bit. You know, the Double Door going away for for a
Yeti store. Yeah, what Yeti? Because when, you know, I'm Jewish, and so when I read, I thought it was Yenti, which is like, you know, your aunt who talks too much or something like that. I think that's patriarchal or misogynist, sexist for sure. But I think it's like Yiddish for like nag or some shit. I don't know.
Kind of works.
Yeah, but it's not that. It's not a store of just like grandmas.
Nagging grandmas. I don't think so.
Okay.
I haven't been there yet.
All right, word.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, for like refrigerator store. But I mean, that's like pulling the teeth right out of the old Wicker Park that you experienced.
Yeah, man. No, I know. That was sad. I mean, that's the thing, is like, I think, you know, depending on where you're at, you can mark the beginning and end of a lot of things, and like these things are cyclical. And but yeah, certainly that was a moment. There were so many important places that I got my start in, both as a writer and also as just like a young hip hop fan in Wicker, you know, because there were so many venues that you could go to, open mics, you know, many days of the week, you know, where I got on venues that would host both spaces for poets, but also for rappers, for b-boys and b-girls, and it was like an emergent and young culture, you know, and I was privy to that. And there were public spaces where we could go find one another, gather, and that was new. You know, there wasn't a time before that. When I was younger coming up, there were very few spaces that you could go to that were public, that had hip-hop at its center as a cultural space, you know. And so when places in Wicker and other places around the city began to do that, it was this, you know, it was like, oh my God, finally, like I might have some friends, you know what I mean?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because like I talk to a lot of people my age and like younger than me, and it doesn't feel as though there's that epicenter anymore. Like even when like I was younger, it was still the northern part of Wicker. It was still like the Logan Square thing was still kind of coming along.
Yeah, rest in peace, East Room.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Geez,
yeah.
Man, yeah. Talk about something going away.
Yeah.
That didn't even have that long of a run.
No.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. But it's a club. Club life is small,
yeah.
you know.
R.I.P. Lumen and all the rest.
Yeah. Yeah.
From back in the day. But I would say that where would you say it kind of resides now? Like, do you feel like Chicago's kind of got a scattered artist community? I feel like there's not as many places you walk down the street. Like I remember walking through Pilsen and seeing Mick walking around, you know, or driving his car, and seeing Jamila walking through the street, and like just different people I would have in my iPod be walking around, and you don't see that as much anymore. I feel like there's kind of been a disconnect, and I feel like you kind of see it a little bit in the artistry too right now. I feel like we're not as like consistent as we were, but I feel like, you know, there's a little chain like kind of maybe broken, not unfixable. And I have a way to bring this all back to the positive side. But,
that's a great question.
You, like, recognize at all?
I think about it a lot, you know, and yeah, I think that, you know, it was in the last. This was a great run for Chicago. The decade was it was a great decade for Chicago.
Yeah.
But if we want the same energy, vibrancy, we have to reorganize and recenter ourselves. Part of what's happened is that there have been a lot of people, and this is something that's endemic in Chicago's history, is that some of the best and brightest go toward the lure of industry on the coast, and that has happened recently. It's happened throughout the decade, but I think about some of the folks who have been so integral in this moment, and now they no longer live here.
Right.
And I understand it completely. And we need more places like this, like Soundscape, to and more platforms like this to put on for our own, and also keep our own. And so I think that will be a struggle that we find in this next decade: is how do we, as a city, preserve and not be beholden to the lure of the coast, not be building a culture that doesn't account for creatives who can afford to live here and afford to make here, which is part of a big deal of it. Like, it's the city is getting very costly. It's much more expensive to live in the neighborhoods that we've been talking about, which is some of the sites that young artists will gather and make in together in community, which I think is part of where the energy comes from.
Absolutely.
And I think I think you're right that we've lost some of that. There's been a shift. I mean, I'm very lucky because I get to see where A Pulse is every week at Young Chicago Authors.
Yeah,
and
you are kind of threading that needle between.
And it stays very fresh. And so Tuesday night, like, I'm never worried about the state of culture in Chicago, because every Tuesday I'm like, oh, it's actually in really good hands, and these young people are very dope. Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, okay, we're actually very good, but I am interested in how we scale being good and keep your generation and a generation younger than you here, because I think that is going to make the difference in the city, in the city's future.
Well, and you have been you have offered such a breeding ground for young talent here in the city through Young Chicago Authors. I mean, I remember seeing Saba for the first time there back in like 2013 when he was still doing open mics, and that, thinking back on that, to me, is still crazy.
Well, when his crew rolled up, and I just I was able to, Red Bull asked me to write a piece for the John Wall Day, which I'm really proud of Nichelle and John Wall Foundation, and just can't believe the impact that they've had, and her ability to persevere and do something in her son's name that is so powerful, that will have now and will continue to have such a deep reverberation in the creative lives of young people in the city.
Absolutely.
But I was reflecting on when I first remember seeing Pivot as a crew come and storm the stage and just be down for one another, and really big up one another, and that kind of brotherhood and community that they formed with them amongst themselves, but also what the spirit that they infused into the space. Like, I think for me, I think we still benefit as a community from what they gave to that space.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I just remember, even if it wasn't Saba, if it was someone that like never rapped or did a poem again after that, it was like the energy in the space. I remember being nervous. I was like 23. I remember being nervous when I walked in there, and I wasn't doing anything. I was just kind of observing, and I remember like, man, I need to write good. I need to go home.
I need to get my bars up. I know.
Like,
exactly.
It was an intimidating space to be in, but in a
For
good
real.
way.
Yeah.
What do you think about like NoName, who's like kind of seen all sides, been around, and someone that you were very early on working with, kind of taking a step away. She's kind of choosing a new spot, and I think that's also an interesting thing to talk about with Chicago artists, is the not being afraid to take a step in the direction you want. You see Chance, everybody's kind of made their own moves. NoNames has been an interesting one. I think it's one that's appropriate, honestly. Is that something you've been following?
I'm a giant fan, and I'm a giant fan of hers and her mom's. And her mom, used to run a black bookstore at 47th and King, and so her move into the book club arena is really dope and really powerful. And to me, it's a very natural evolution. I mean, my big hope with NoName is that you know, she always writes because she's one of my favorite writers of any genre. You know, I really just love her as a poet or as a rapper or as, you know, somebody who is putting together language in a way that is profound. You know, and I also think she is coming into her own as a young intellectual, and I really just admire her vulnerability in a public sphere when she has such a large platform to be herself and to be able to go in a different direction or other directions and not be boxed in. And the book club is fresh, you know, like I really admire what they're doing, and they're getting people to read some really great important texts, and you know, but also, you know, what they're selecting. I mean, I you know, I haven't stayed up with like every month, but like they definitely are putting people on to shit that is important. And yeah, I mean, who knows? You know, I think that all of us are trying to figure out, you know, what we're doing, and I think she's having a go at it. I think the difficulty of being someone, I would imagine, of being someone like her, Chance, people who have such large public platforms, is that, you know, you develop a lane, you develop a fan base, and then sometimes if you veer outside of that lane, people are trepidatious. But you know, these are incredibly talented, genius young artists, and so I think we should be like, yo, if you want to move toward that, that is probably going to be like dope. You know what I mean? Like that. Yeah, I mean,
it doesn't seem like there's a lot of bounds on the Chicago artists at the moment.
Shouldn't be.
You know?
Yeah. No. We could do a lot. Yeah, we're like, we stay fresh regardless of category. Yeah.
Well, I got to say, one thing I wanted to mention was that back when I was like a junior in college, when I was 2011, something like that, I was on my way out of school, but I was taking a nonfiction writing class, and I had Idris Goodwin come through my class. And it's crazy to think about that. I always think about that in context. Like when I was at your book release, I was thinking about that in context. And him and Felicia, his wife, was my teacher at the time.
What?
And
wait, where's this?
University of Iowa. Yeah, I never told you the story.
You've mentioned it, but I didn't know that Felicia was your teacher.
Felicia was my teacher.
Dope. She's
I
raw.
actually failed the nonfiction writing class because the teacher didn't like me. So
Felicia?
I had to
oh, okay.
No, I had to retake it, and I ended up getting Felicia, which is like most random circumstances. But Idris came in and told us about breakbeat poetry, and I remember like it was in the back of my head, and then it kept coming up, and then I met you like once I got to the city and started writing stories. And so for me, it's been crazy. This is about a decade of me knowing about being aware of breakbeat poetry. And when you talk about the last decade you've been, what is like some highlights, you know, like that you've taken this thing to think like back then when Idris came to my school and talked to a class about breakbeat poetry to the point it's at now.
Yeah.
I think that you've really opened up a lane for a lot of people. And it's been, I mean, I can't believe it's been that long, to be honest, but
I know
it's really a thing now. You know, back then it was like, I think it was more, it was already
it was an idea. Yeah, it was an idea.
And I think now you can look that up online and it's a tangible, real thing. What does that mean to you, or what's been kind of the journey like?
That's cool.
Kind of a loaded question.
No, that's cool, man. I appreciate that. I appreciate you saying that and for the question. Yeah, man. I mean, I think we, you know, Idris is the homie and Felicia's the homie, and I think Idris and I have just an ongoing conversation about what we're doing as a, you know, as an inheritor of hip hop cultural practice, as a participant in the culture. Like it's just like an ongoing generational question about what are we doing, and what are the aesthetics. And so, you know, he came up with that phrase in conversation probably somewhere around 07. Right. And that's when we kind of, I'm like, because I was working, I knew I wanted to do an anthology, and we just stayed talking about it. And so to go from there to him, you know, both of us, I think, dreaming about it in the, you know, early part of the last decade. And then the first anthology came out in 2015. And subsequently, we now have an imprint and a press, and it on Haymarket Books. And it is a thing, you know, and it's been powerful. And I think that we're just getting started. It feels that way, you know, that we have a lot to do, because I think we started it and we kind of want to gather one another because we are very concerned with the maintenance of a counter narrative, you know, and I think hip hop has done that historically, has been a space where you can be assured that you will receive a counter narrative. It's a space that is, in my mind, very elastic and radically democratic, and so a lot of people can have a voice in the cipher, and so we want to do that in the world of literature, but also want to do that in other spaces too. You know, I mean, right now we're publishing books, but very interested in other spaces, and you know, curating art shows and getting into film and television and stuff like that. So I think like we're at the beginning of hopefully what will be a wider and wider space for people with different ideas to speak to a broader public.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. It's super important. What would you look at as like the last 10 years kind of, what's like maybe a proudest moment for you? Whether it's like a proud dad moment or a proud moment for yourself, like what's one moment you kind of look back at over this last decade? I know we're getting to that time. It's December.
Yeah, no, I know.
2019.
You know, yeah, that's a good question. I think a thing that Idris tells me about a lot is that you know, we're able to feed other people. You know, and you know, both at YCA and breakbeat stuff and just all of the different curatorial opportunities I get to put money in artists' hands. You know, I want to always make the case for people who I think are dope, and I am proud of that, and that's something I want to do a lot more of, is being able to you know, one, carve out the time that I have the opportunity to make, and then also be able to shine the light elsewhere too, you know. And so yeah, I want to continue to grow and be better at that, and it's also something that I feel good about, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I don't want to keep you too long.
No, it's okay. Yeah.
Peppering you, but it is also one of your other endeavors. 20 years for Louder Than a Bomb.
Yeah.
Another decade situation.
Yeah.
Again, putting another space together for people to like shine a light on talents and show people that they can express themselves on the stage. What can people expect from the 20th year? I mean, you guys have taken, when you talk about building something, breakbeat poetry is one thing. Louder Than a Bomb is a whole other one. That thing has really exploded across the country. What would you say is like something you're looking forward to this time around? Is there just some big surprises in store?
Yeah, I mean, I think there'll be, you know, I think the thing that I'm hoping and I'm looking forward to is that there will be alum who come back, you know, people I maybe have not seen for a long time. And I'm always excited to, you know, keep in tune with who's doing what and where everyone has gone and the ways people kind of use the space to do other things. Like Chris Classic told me a great story about in high school being around Louder Than a Bomb. And, you know, I didn't know him, and I think he was like hanging out with the Lane Tech team or something like that. But he told me, and I you know, I don't know how accurate this is or whatever, but he was like, yeah, he's like, I started Classic Studios in part because I wanted that same kind of community that I was getting at Louder Than a Bomb in this space, you know, or whatever.
That's cool.
And so, yeah, something like that is like, always like, it's not really related, but it's, you know, it's like energy breeds energy.
Absolutely.
And so I want, you know, I like hearing stories like that. But really, the thing about Louder Than a Bomb that I'm excited about every year is I get to meet a whole new crew of very, very talented young writers who have a lot to say, who are very brave, who put on for one another. Just a great group of, you know, hundreds and up toward 1,000 kids, you know. And so that is the best thing that I think, you know, we do in some ways is that just gathering of not only the students who will be on stage, but their peers, their teachers, their parents, the communities that they come from, and, you know, all happening throughout, you know, that like a 3-month time frame in the city is I'm looking forward to seeing everyone, you know.
Well, I think, you know, it's interesting when you like say all that too, because we started this conversation talking about needing spaces for community, and invariably you're constantly, so no one, you know, stroke of genius to like have a problem and else like offer a solution. So it's good to, I'm glad you're out here making solutions.
Thanks.
Constantly making solutions. I don't want to keep you too much longer, man. It's cold outside.
It's all good. Yeah, no, I appreciate. Yeah.
But thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you, man. Appreciate the time,
everybody,
space.
You can find Kevin Coval, K Coval. You'll find him everywhere. Just Google the guy.
Yeah. IG at Kevin Coval, Twitter at Kevin Coval, Coval. Yeah, no, I'm gonna be playing Fortnite with my nephew.
We'll be back again. But this has been Kevin Coval. I'm Jake Krez, as always. This has been Mild Sauce Live, and we are out from Soundscape Studios.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Mild Sauce.